1940s, we saw a crossroads where some musicians were tired of pleasing the crowds and wanted to get more experimental with music. This gave birth to bebop. In contrast, we also have a new style, once again originating from African American communities, called rhythm and blues. Did you know that Hound Dog was originally recorded by an African American woman years before Elvis released his version? My name is Vicky O'Neon, I'm a drummer and educator, and in this episode we'll explore the development of music and drumming in the 1940s.
Vicky O'Neon presents
Drumming Through the Decades. When World War II broke out, nearly 16 million American men had to leave for war, and women were urged to fill their places in society. This was considered their patriotic duty. Some female musicians were now asked to fill men's roles in big bands and jazz orchestras. This led to many female musicians going abroad to perform for the American soldiers. Many entertainment venues closed as America went into lights-out mode. One of the few bands playing when the Japanese attacked in 1941 was Ada Leonard's All-American Girl Orchestra. World War II gave them their name, and they worked hard for the American military services. They would play 2 shows per day, 6 days per week, and often be drafted to perform in hospitals on their days off as well. The drummer was Florence Fagel-Liebman, who grew up in Brooklyn, New York. She was a self-taught drummer and a jazz enthusiast who had explored jazz by watching musicians like Duke Ellington, Benny Goodman, and Gene Krupa perform. She describes in Sally Plaxton's book American Women in Jazz that her time in the band was at first a really thrilling musical time because it was all jazz. She also admits that there were some grueling times on the road. The famous American drummer Viola Smith says in an interview that before World War II, there were many prejudices against female musicians, but during the war, they finally began to be taken more seriously, at least to an extent, and people could finally see what girl musicians were capable of when they were given a chance. In 1942, she wrote an article called "Give Girl Musicians a Break" in Downbeat magazine, which caused a lot of controversy. Smith says she was standing up for women musicians not just as a temporary wartime substitute, but for women to be acknowledged for their skills and capabilities and become permanent on the music scene. This opened up a floodgate of letters to the editor and started debates between readers that would last for months. One of the answers to Viola's articles were, "I'll tell you right now, I do not like girl musicians. Girls should leave this kind of business to persons who know what it's all about, and I mean men." Unfortunately, there were also several women who were against female musicians with comments like, "I definitely agree that girls do not make good swing music. When it comes to playing good music, girls, how about leaving it to the boys? Our place is listening and dancing to music, not sitting in with the band and blowing our brains out." What would have been your input into these articles and debates? When the war ended in 1945, most female musicians lost their jobs. When the male musicians returned, it was said that the women should return to their rightful place in the home. Specific gender roles were now strongly imposed in society after the war, and the uprise of women taking up more space in the music industry now had a big backlash. Big bands were becoming less popular due to economic times, and several ballrooms, hotels, and nightclubs closed down, and bands now started to become smaller. So the music industry was changing, and there were influences from new music styles. Another big change for live entertainment was also the popularization of black and white television, which became the main form of entertainment. musicians felt like they wanted to take jazz further and experiment more, rather than playing music for people to dance to, which up until that point had made jazz music so popular. So a new style emerged in Harlem called Bebop, which was very much based on improvisation. The musicians would take famous songs, so-called standards, and rewrite the melody to something much more complex and intricate than we had ever heard in music before. In the 1940s, the term jazz was more associated with bebop, and it became its own art form where musicians got to push boundaries of what you can do with jazz music. Let's pop over to my studio for a little breakdown. So first of all, the setup of the drum set now developed once again. Drummers now replaced the huge bass drums, which up until this point could have been up to 30 inches in size, and they were now replaced with smaller ones, around 20-inch bass drums, which we are used to seeing today. And they now also started to use much larger cymbals than the ones we had seen before. And especially one large cymbal became a really important feature, which is the ride cymbal. And this is the cymbal that drummers now started to use to keep time on. So instead of having the low pumping sound from the bass drum keeping time, we now started to have a higher frequency that was lighter and washier and floats on top in terms of frequencies to keep the time. And I've actually jumped a few decades ahead using my Roland V drums to demonstrate all of this. And the reason is because I live in a residential area, and as the music gets louder, I want to be respectful of my neighbors. But what's so cool about the Roland V drums and the kit that I have is that it has amazing built-in sounds that can sort of replicate all these different drum kits through the decades that we're gonna go through. So from now onwards, you will see me on the Roland V drums. Because we're now moving away from the pumping 4-on-the-floor bass drum, that actually frees up the bass to now start improvising rhythms along with the snare. So using the bass drum this way was also called dropping bombs, and this allowed drummers to become more melodic in the rhythms they were playing to accompany more elaborate melodies played by the horn players. Bebop was in general also a lot faster than previous jazz styles, and the drum kit was now featured more as a standout instrument, and it was common to hear so-called tradings between drums and other instruments. That started to explore this new exciting jazz form, but there's records of African-American all-girl swing band Darlings of Rhythm playing so-called hot jazz, which is definitely related to bebop. There's rumors that Darlings trumpeter Josephine Boyd jammed with Dizzy Gillespie and played a role in helping him to invent bebop.
Don't care if you're young or old, get together and let the good times roll.
Bebop, however, didn't really appeal to the average person who wanted to go out dancing at the weekend. So there was another exciting style that started to emerge amongst African-American communities called rhythm and blues, which was very danceable. This is where the electric bass and guitar comes into the picture, which meant that drummers for the first time ever could really start to play heavier grooves, which influenced this new style. It's easy to forget today that there was a time before amplification and the impact that that would have had on the way drummers were playing, right? So let's check out some rhythm and blues in my studio. So to show you the development into rhythm and blues, I'll compare it to the big band swing feel that sounded like this to keep time. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a... For rhythm and blues, drummers started to emphasize the whole shuffle feel instead of the swing feel because they were now able to really start playing out more. So the difference is 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a instead of 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. The idea of having the backbeat in a song on beat 2 and 4, which you hear in most styles of music today, didn't really happen on the drums until 1948. Good Rocking Tonight by Wynonie Harris was one of the first songs that had the backbeat emphasized throughout the song. And this was a direct influence from gospel music where you would clap on beat 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Prior to this would have been difficult to do on the drums because that strong backbeat would basically have drowned out all the other instruments. But thanks to the electric bass and guitar, this was now possible. Good Rocking Tonight became a huge hit because people simply loved to dance to it, and it would stay in the charts for over 6 months. So in the early shuffle, you would also emphasize all those notes in the snare drum, so it would sound something like this. Later on, we also started to see a heavier backbeat being applied, and then the groove would sound more like this. So you can hear that this is heading towards rock and roll, which we will talk about more in the next episode. I'm now gonna play along to a little snippet of Good Rockin' Tonight.
I heard the news, there's good rockin' tonight. Gonna hold my baby tight as I can. Tonight she'll...
Willie Mae, Big Mama Thornton, was the first known female blues singer to combine her vocals and songwriting talent with her drumming skills. She grew up singing in church and taught herself to play harmonica and drums, which would become regular parts of her on-stage performances. She would actively perform the chitlin circuit, which was considered safe for African Americans to perform in the days of segregation.
You ain't nothing but a house.
In 1953, she recorded a song you might have heard of called Hound Dog, which went straight to #1 in the rhythm and blues charts. Even though it sold more than 2 million copies, Thornton would only receive a total of $500 for it. Elvis Presley, who released his version just a few years later, would not only receive incredible fame, but also a fortune from the same record. Historians have noted this as one of the most notorious examples of the inequity that existed between black and white artists at the time.
Lord, you know I'm so unhappy, 'cause you taking Maxwell Street away.
Johnny Mae Dunson is another singing drummer who would become a Chicago blues legend. She started performing on Maxwell Street, the celebrated birthplace of Chicago blues. Her drumming style was described as free bashing, based on her childhood memories beating sticks against her mother's tin water buckets. In an article in the Chicago Tribune, she says, "When I first started playing in Chicago in the 1940s, people said ugly things about women who plays the blues. They said, she must not be a woman if she plays the drums." Dunson was also a prolific songwriter, writing over 600 blues tunes in her over 60-year-long career. She also wrote songs for famous artists like Muddy Waters and Jimmy Reed, but never got paid more than $50 and often nothing at all. She continued to drum and sing the blues until her death in 2007. Rhythm and blues was initially made for and enjoyed by African American communities before it reached an international audience and absolutely exploded. It was the forerunner to rock and roll, which would change the history of music forever. More on this in the next episode as we head into the 1950s.
Baby, how I feel fine, I'm gonna rock it up. I'm gonna rip it up. I'm gonna shake it up.
Thank you so much for watching. I would love to hear your thoughts, so please drop a comment below, and also make sure to like and subscribe and watch the previous episodes if you haven't already done so. I'll see you again next time.